continuing debate. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It gives me great pleasure, both as a Member of Parliament and as a Canadian citizen and as a father, to stand and speak and offer the full support of the New Democratic Party for Bill S-211. I also would like to congratulate my honourable colleague from Kitchener-Conestoga for bringing this bill forward from the Senate. It's also a pleasure to speak to a bill that I think has the uniform support of all members of this House, and I dare say of all parties of this House, as we all join together in trying to shed some light and increase support for Canadian citizens and, in fact, anybody in the world who is touched by autism spectrum disorder. I'm particularly pleased about this because one of the first bills that I introduced in this House when I was elected in 2008 was Bill C-327, which is an act respecting Canadian Autism Day. And at that time I said that I was proud to introduce legislation that would recognize the work of those involved in every aspect of this subject, and as well to recognize those that are affected by autism in any manner, whether as a person who has the disorder or as a family member or friend of someone who does. My bill, as this one does, would recognize the challenges faced by friends and families of people with this condition, and in particular parents who raise an autistic child, and all the special people who work with and advocate for them. I think it's only right and long overdue to mark and appreciate these challenges. And at that time, my bill sought to make April 23rd to be World Autism Day, and to make that a Canadian Autism Day to jibe. And I'm pleased to say that this concept is being pushed forward as well, and I join with all the members of this House that have done so much work on this. The creation of a National or International Autism Day brings light and attention to those who fall in the autism spectrum and to those who tirelessly support a family member or friend. It reminds us that we require so much more in terms of funding for research, support, coverage under the Canada Health Act, which I think is long overdue. Now, we've heard a lot of very excellent descriptions of the technicalities of this disorder, so I'll be brief on this, but of course, autism spectrum disorder refers to the vast continuum of severity and developmental impairment of unknown origin. It is estimated that 1 in every 165 children is born with a type of ASD. There are approximately 200,000 Canadians estimated to be living with an ASD, and I say ASD because, as my colleague from the block just pointed out, there are different types of autism spectrum disorder, ranging from autism to Asperger's to pervasive developmental disorder of unknown origin. The most common autism spectrum disorder is found in young boys. It's in fact 4 times more common in boys than in girls. And autism is not related to race, ethnicity, family income, lifestyle, or parenting. There is no standard type or, quote, typical, end quote, person with an autism spectrum disorder. This disorder is marked by some very specific signs, and of course people fall on a wide spectrum with this disorder, from people who are profoundly affected all the way to extremely high-functioning individuals. ASD is marked by difficulty with social skills. Some people with ASD show no interest in other people whatsoever. Others might be interested but not know how to talk, play with, or relate to others. Initiating and maintaining a conversation is usually difficult for people with ASDs. It's marked by problems with communication. Speech and language skills may begin to develop, begin late, and then be lost, or they may develop more slowly, or in fact they may never develop. Without appropriate intensive early intervention, about 40% of children with ASDs do not talk at all. People with ASDs are often unable to interpret nonverbal communication, such as social distance cues, or the use of gestures and facial cues that most of us take for granted. There can be repeated behaviors and restricted interests. People with ASDs may have repeated ritualistic actions, such as spinning, repeated rocking, staring, finger flapping, and sometimes hitting oneself. They may also have very restricted interests, talking about or focusing obsessively on only one thing, idea, or activity. Their habits may seem odd to others. Small changes in the environment or in a daily routine that most people can manage might trigger acute distress. There's an unusual response to sensations in many cases. People with ASDs may have both auditory and visual processing problems. And although sensory problems vary in autism, this can occur from mild to severe levels with over and under sensitivities of all types. Last, it's important to note that people with ASDs often have very unique abilities. Some have an accurate and detailed memory for information and facts, high visual recall, and a superb ability to manipulate data for useful purposes. They may be able to concentrate for long periods of time on particular tasks and be far more attentive to details than most of us. Now, I want to pause for a moment, and we've heard a lot about the scientific and technical aspect. I want to talk about the human aspect. Outside my door in Vancouver Kingsway, I've noticed over the past several months a grandfather who walks by every day pulling a wagon with a young girl in it. The young girl appears to be about 5 or 6 years old. And I went out the other day and I brought a little Canadian flag to give to the young girl. And when I approached the young girl, she turned away and was unable, absolutely unable to interact with me at all. And it was very, very quickly apparent to me that this young girl obviously had ASD. And I was so touched by the fact that her grandfather, every day without fail, would take her out and bring her out into the community. And it made me realize, of course, very acutely, how much this ASD is in our communities. My youngest daughter, Davies, suffers from a global developmental delay. It is not autism, but she has many friends because we have had to become part of a community of people, of parents that have children with differences of all types, ranging from Down syndrome to autism to physical and mental challenges of all types. And what I think this bill reminds us of is how important it is to remember that we can't just focus on autism. We have to focus on all developmental disorders that affect children, including those that are of unknown origin and even those that defy diagnosis. Because we have hundreds of thousands of children in Canada right now who are getting up and going to school every day who do not get the support, whether from a healthcare point of view or an educational point of view or from a social support point of view. And we have to broaden this to include all of those children. I want to also point out that in my riding, there's world-class research being done on autism. Dr. Anthony Bailey had the very first endowed chair in the world researching autism, and he's based out of Children's Hospital, where he's doing world-class research, particularly genetic, in the autism field. And there is absolute excitement and endless possibility for what we could be able to do for people with autism because of this kind of research, and I want to commend them for that. I want to quote from an email I got this morning from Lenore Clemens, who lives in my riding. She said, "Thank you. We need so many more resources, especially for those who have not received a definitive diagnosis, but still all have the same general problem. No definitive diagnosis that fits a funding box, no supports for families or those with disabilities, even with the same need for resources and therapeutic interventions is there. Doctors often admit even when they themselves can't make a definite diagnosis, therapies and supports are needed but not available. A huge issue is government, like the BC Liberals, is removing eligibility for supports from legislation. This is especially apparent in schools. And a reminder to the House, tax credits don't work for the poor." Another person wrote and said, "What's happening in the community living sector in BC is they're moving developmentally disabled people out of group homes, shutting them down, into home shares with people they find on Craigslist. CLBC has to cut $22 million this fiscal year. The bottom line is that we need to have therapy and support for everybody with autism and all developmental disorders from childhood right through to adulthood." And I think what this shows, Mr. Speaker, is that it's not enough to declare a World Autism Day, as laudable and important as that is. What we need to do is vastly increase the funding for not only research, which I give credit to this government for doing, but also to make sure that we have supports for families and children at an early age. It's well known that early intervention for children with autism, as with I think every developmental disorder, early intervention is key to helping those children obtain the best possible results. We need to make sure there's support in schools, support with doctors, and in our communities for social supports to get these people the help they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Resuming debate, the member of the